This single dad found a disabled girl alone at the bus stop, but when he takes her home and finds out who her mother is, he's shocked. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The light rain fell on the grey asphalt as the 30-year-old man parked his car in front of his son's elementary school. It was a typical Tuesday, one of those days that repeats itself without surprises, with the same old routine. Pick up his 4-year-old son, go home, prepare dinner, and try to balance the demands of work with single parenthood. He ran his hand through his dark hair as he waited for the gate to open, thinking about the stack of documents he needed to review that night. Life as a single dad had never been easy, but he had gotten used to carrying everything alone since the boy's mother left, leaving only a void that he had learned to fill with double dedication. The boy ran out as soon as he saw him, backpack bouncing on his back, a wide smile plastered on his face. They were talking about his day at school when something caught the man's attention. At the bus stop ahead, in the drizzle that was starting to get heavier, there was a figure that was too small, too fragile, too alone. A child in an old rusty wheelchair with clothes that looked like they had been worn by many people before they got to her. The girl couldn't have been more than 2 years old based on her size, but her eyes carried an unsettling maturity for any child. She was shivering, hugging herself, looking around as if she were looking for someone who should have been there but never arrived. He slowed down the car, feeling his heart clench. His son also noticed the girl and asked why she was alone. The innocent question echoed in the father's mind like a scream. Why would such a young child be abandoned at a bus stop, in the rain, with no one around? He stopped the car a few yards ahead and watched in the rear-view mirror, waiting for an adult to appear. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The rain got heavier, and the girl started to cry softly, a restrained cry, as if she already knew that shouting wouldn't help. That was too much for him. Despite the rational voice in his head saying that he shouldn't get involved, that there could be complications, that the child's mother might be nearby and misinterpret his approach, his feet were already taking him back to the bus stop. He crouched down in front of the girl, taking care not to startle her even more, and asked in the softest voice he could manage where her mother was. The little one just shook her head, her wide eyes fixed on him, unable to form complete words. He tried other questions, but the answers were always the same. Silence, shaking her head, tears running down her dirty face. His son got out of the car and came over to where they were, holding his father's hand tightly. The boy's innocence did not understand the gravity of the situation. He just saw another child needing help. He asked if the girl wanted to go with them, and the father felt a lump in his throat as he realized that he didn't have many options. Leaving her there, alone, wet and cold, was unthinkable. Waiting indefinitely for someone who might never show up was also not a solution. He looked around one more time, looking for any sign of a guardian, but the bus stop remained empty, except for the 3 of them. He made the decision that would change everything in the following months. He carried the worn wheelchair to the car, noticing how light it was, improvised with mismatched parts, clearly patched up several times. The girl didn't protest when he put her in the back seat next to his son. She just kept shivering, her eyes glued to the window as if she was still waiting for someone to come and get her. Throughout the drive to his house, he tried to talk to her, but the answers were fragmented, loose words that barely formed sentences. She was 4 years old, he discovered with surprise, although she looked much younger. She lived far away, in a place that she couldn't describe properly, and her mother had left her at the bus stop in the morning. The information landed like a stone in his stomach. In the morning. This meant that the little one had been there for hours, alone, exposed to the elements, without food, without water, without protection. What kind of mother does that to her own daughter? Anger began to seethe inside him, but he restrained it as he looked at the girl in the rearview mirror. There was something in her eyes, a disturbing resignation, as if that was normal for her, as if waiting alone at bus stops was just another day in her life. When they arrived home, he prepared a warm bath while his son set aside clean towels. The girl accepted the care with a passivity that made him even more worried. 4-year-olds should protest, ask questions, be wary of the unfamiliar environment. But she just let him help her, as if she didn't have the energy to react. It was during the bath that he saw the marks, bruises in varying shades of purple and yellow scattered across her too thin arms and legs. Some old, some more recent. The malnutrition was obvious in her protruding ribs, her arms that looked like twigs, her sunken face. He felt his throat tighten. That child wasn't just abandoned that day, she had been neglected for a long time. He dressed her in his son's clothes that were huge on her, wrapped her in a warm blanket, and took her to the kitchen. He prepared soup, bread, warm milk, but she ate slowly, in small sips, as if her stomach had forgotten how to process real food. His son sat next to her, offering her favorite toys, trying to make her smile. And little by little, very slowly, a small, shy smile appeared on the girl's face. That night, after putting the 2 children to sleep in the same room, he stayed awake for hours, trying to decide what to do. Calling the authorities seemed like the right thing to do, but he knew how the system worked. The girl would be thrown into some overcrowded institution, probably separated from any chance of proper care because of her special needs. But keeping her there without understanding the complete situation wasn't right either. He needed to find her mother, understand what was happening, why a woman would abandon her own daughter like that. The early hours of the morning arrived without him finding easy answers. Only the certainty that, at least for that night, he had done the only thing that his conscience allowed. He had given shelter, food, and care to a child who desperately needed all of that. What would come next? The complications, the difficult questions, the judgments, all of that could wait until dawn. For now, the girl was safe, warm, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. Morning arrived with a shy sun that insisted on shining through the curtains. He woke up early, as always, but this time he found a scene that he never expected to see in his house. The 2 children were sleeping side by side in his son's bed, their little bodies relaxed in a deep sleep that seemed to bring peace to both of them. The girl had a peaceful expression on her face, so different from the panic he had seen the night before. His son was holding her hand, even sleeping, as if he wanted to make sure she wouldn't disappear. He made coffee and tried to organize his thoughts. He needed to find the girl's mother, understand the real situation, but a part of him feared what he would discover. When the children woke up, he asked gentle questions, trying to extract information without putting too much pressure. The girl managed to describe some landmarks on the way to her house: a big church, a market with a red sign, dirt roads. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After breakfast, he put the 2 children in the car and set off in search of the address. The girl pointed out directions with small gestures, pointing to where they should turn. With each kilometer, the neighborhood changed. The houses got smaller, the streets more precarious, the asphalt gave way to dirt. They entered a community that he had never visited before. A labyrinth of narrow alleys where shacks piled up on top of each other, built with improvised materials that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The girl finally pointed to a particularly small shack with cracked wooden walls and a patched tin roof. He parked the car and carried the wheelchair, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked on the door once, twice, 3 times. A woman opened it, and he needed a second to process what he saw. She must have been 30 years old, but she looked much older, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, calloused hands, and simple clothes that had been washed so many times that they had lost their original color. Relief exploded on her face when she saw her daughter, but there was something else there, something he couldn't immediately identify. Before he could speak, the woman pulled the girl inside in a tight embrace, muttering words he couldn't hear. Then she turned to him, and the gratitude in her eyes was real, but there was also fear. He began to question her, his voice coming out harsher than he intended, asking how she could abandon her own daughter at a bus stop, leave her alone for hours in the rain, exposed to every imaginable danger. The woman didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, hugging her daughter as if she was afraid he would snatch her from her arms. That's when she broke down. Tears began to fall as she explained, her voice breaking with every word. She worked in 3 different places, she said. She woke up at 4 a.m. to clean offices downtown, then went to a diner where she washed dishes until mid-afternoon, and finished the day cleaning a commercial building. The girl needed expensive treatments, medications that cost more than she earned in an entire week. On that specific day, the neighbor who took care of her daughter had a family emergency and couldn't help. She had to choose between missing work and losing her job, or leaving the girl at the busiest bus stop she knew, hoping that someone would help her if something happened. He looked around the shack, a narrow bed in the corner, a small 2-burner stove, an old refrigerator that hummed too loudly. The broken wheelchair leaning against the wall, with a crooked wheel that probably made it even more difficult for the girl to get around. There was nothing superfluous there, no luxury, no waste. Each object had an essential function for survival. The anger he had felt began to turn into something different, something more complex and uncomfortable. The woman continued to speak, the words coming out in a desperate flow. She explained that she was alone, that she had no family, that the girl's father had disappeared when he found out about her disability, that she worked non-stop, but the money was never enough, that the bills piled up, that the medications became more and more expensive, that sometimes she had to choose between buying food or medicine, between paying the electricity bill or transportation, that she did the impossible every day, but still felt like she was failing her daughter. He took his wallet out of his pocket and handed her money, a generous amount that would cover at least a few months of expenses. Her reaction surprised him. She took a step back, her wounded pride plastered on her face, and said that she didn't need charity, that she was grateful for what he had done for her daughter, that she would be eternally grateful for him taking care of her when she couldn't be there, but that she wouldn't accept money as if she were a beggar. That refusal, that dignity maintained even in the face of extreme poverty, completely changed the way he saw her. He put the money away and stood there for a few more minutes, watching the interaction between mother and daughter. The love was obvious, impossible to deny. The way the woman touched the girl's face, how she checked if she was okay, how she hugged her with an intensity that seemed to try to make up for all the hours she had to be away. But there was also exhaustion in those gestures, a fatigue so deep that it seemed to have penetrated her bones. He said goodbye and went home with his son, but the image of that shack, that woman and that girl, wouldn't leave his head. His son asked if his little friend would be okay, and he didn't know what to answer. How could he tell the 4-year-old boy that the world was sometimes too unfair, that good people suffered undeservedly, that there were children going hungry and cold while others had everything in abundance? The days dragged on, but he couldn't stop thinking about them. At work, while reviewing contracts and participating in meetings about investments and profits, his mind wandered to that precarious shack. At home, when he put his son to sleep in a comfortable bed, he remembered the girl who probably slept in inadequate conditions. Guilt began to gnaw inside, a persistent feeling that he could and should do more. He returned to the community a few times in the following weeks, always bringing bags with groceries, toys for the girl, clothes that he presented as leftovers that they no longer used. The girl's mother accepted reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unable to refuse help that her daughter desperately needed. During those visits, he was putting together a more complete picture of their lives. He discovered that the woman woke up when it was still dark outside, left food prepared for her daughter when she could, and didn't come home until night had already fallen. That she slept a maximum of 4 hours a night. That she hadn't had a single day off in months. That she was literally consuming herself to keep her daughter alive, but that her body had limits that had been exceeded for too long. On one of those visits, he stayed watching the interaction between mother and daughter for longer. The girl asked when they could go for a walk, something simple like going to a park, and the mother's answer broke his heart. She said soon, maybe next month, if she could get a day off. But they both knew that that day would probably never come. The girl didn't cry, didn't throw a tantrum. She just nodded and went back to playing with a broken car, and that childish resignation was more painful than any tear could be. He started to notice other disturbing details, the way the girl's mother sometimes leaned against the wall as if her legs could no longer support her, how her hands trembled when she picked up objects, how she coughed in a way that indicated it wasn't just a passing cold. She was sick, he realized with growing horror. She was working herself to exhaustion while her own body was collapsing, and if something happened to her, the girl would be completely alone in the world. His son kept asking about his little friend, wanting to know when she would come back to play. The childish insistence planted an idea in his mind, a possibility that started small but grew with each passing day. What if he could help in a more permanent way? What if there was a way to get that woman out of that impossible situation without hurting her pride? What if that girl could have a real chance at a decent life? But before he could formulate a plan, the phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. It was the neighbor from the community, the one who sometimes took care of the girl. Her voice was desperate, saying that the mother hadn't shown up to pick up her daughter, that it was already night, and the girl was in a panic, crying non-stop, and no one knew where the mother was. He dropped everything and ran to the car. The drive to the community seemed to last an eternity, each red light increasing his anxiety. When he finally arrived, he found the girl in a state that broke his heart. She was curled up in the neighbor's lap, sobbing desperately, her whole body trembling. These weren't ordinary child's tears. They were the tears of someone who already knew abandonment, who already knew what it was like to be alone in the world. The neighbor explained that the mother had left for work in the morning as usual, but hadn't returned at the agreed time. They tried calling the places where she worked, but no one knew anything. Hours passed, and night arrived without news. He took the girl in his arms and felt her despair rub off on him. He promised that he would find her mother, but even he didn't completely believe his own words. He spent hours calling hospitals, police stations, anywhere that might have information. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that he got an answer. A woman matching her description had been admitted to a public hospital downtown. She was unconscious when she arrived. He left the children with a babysitter and went there immediately, fear tightening his chest like a vice. The hospital was one of those overcrowded places where people waited hours for care. He walked through crowded corridors, past gurneys lined up in the hallways, until he finally found her in a crowded ward. She was in a narrow bed, connected to IVs, her face even paler than he remembered. A nurse explained that she had collapsed at work due to extreme exhaustion and severe malnutrition. Her body had simply shut down, unable to continue functioning under that constant pressure. When she woke up and saw him there, tears began to fall before she could even speak. She begged him, her voice weak and broken, to take care of her daughter until she recovered. She said she had no one else in the world, that if something happened to her, the girl would be completely alone, that she couldn't bear the idea of her daughter being thrown into some cold institution where no one would understand her needs. He held her hand and promised that he would take care of the girl for as long as necessary. He saw relief flood her face, but he also saw something darker there. the certainty that her body was at its limit, that she might not be able to continue that impossible routine for much longer. She was discharged 3 days later against medical advice to remain at rest for at least 2 weeks. But she had no choice, she explained in a tired voice. If she didn't go back to work, she would lose her jobs, and without the jobs, there would be no money for her daughter's medication. The girl stayed at his house during that entire period, and he realized how much her presence changed the dynamics of the home. He had to learn about her medications, the correct times, the precise dosages. He discovered that she needed specific exercises to maintain the mobility she still had. He took her to medical appointments that had been overdue for months because the mother had never been able to take time off to accompany her. And with each passing day, he saw the girl blossom in small but significant ways. She began to gain weight. The previously hollow cheeks became fuller. She smiled more often, especially when she played with his son. The two created a deep connection, playing together for hours, inventing stories, building castles with building blocks. His son showed surprising patience and care for a 4-year-old child, always making sure that his little friend was comfortable, helping her with things that she couldn't reach on her own. At night, after putting the children to sleep, he would think about the girl's mother. She had returned to her exhausting work almost immediately after being discharged, and he knew that this was unsustainable. He tried to talk to her, suggested that she rest more, that she accept financial help at least temporarily until she regained her strength. But she refused everything with a stubbornness that both frustrated him and made him admire her even more. It was then that an idea took shape in his mind. He needed someone to take care of the house, organize things, help with the children while he worked. His routine had been chaotic since he became a single father, and having the girl there only highlighted how much he needed support. And she desperately needed a job that wouldn't slowly kill her. It would be a solution that would benefit both of them, without being charity, just a fair professional proposal. When he finally approached her with the offer, she looked at him with immediate suspicion. She asked what he really wanted. What was the hidden price behind that generosity? He understood the reaction. A poor and lonely woman had learned to distrust men with resources offering help. He patiently explained that it was just work, with a decent salary that would cover her needs and still allow her to save. She would have regular hours, days off, and could bring her daughter along, avoiding leaving her alone or with strangers. The refusal came quickly and firmly. She said that she didn't want to be indebted to anyone, that she wouldn't accept favors disguised as a job, that she preferred to continue as she was to put herself in a position of dependency. He tried to argue, to show that it wasn't a favor but a real need of his, that she would be really useful and that this would be a fair exchange. But she remained inflexible, protecting her dignity as if it were the only thing she still possessed. He didn't give up. He came back in the following days, presented more detailed proposals, showed formal contracts that would guarantee her labor rights. He explained that she would have autonomy to organize the house as she wanted, that there would be no constant supervision or condescending treatment, that he genuinely needed help and that she had all the necessary qualifications. She was organized, careful, and already knew the routine with children with special needs. Little by little, he saw her resistance begin to weaken. She asked practical questions about schedules, tasks, expectations. She wanted guarantees that this wouldn't put her in a vulnerable situation, that she would have privacy and respect. And he provided all those guarantees, perfectly understanding where that fear came from. A woman who had already been discredited and discarded had learned to protect herself. When she finally accepted, it was with very clear conditions. She established rigid boundaries between professional and personal life. She made it clear that she wouldn't accept pity or special treatment, that she would do her job with excellence, but expected to be treated with the same dignity as any other professional. He agreed to everything, secretly admiring that willpower that remained intact despite all the suffering. The first days were strange. She arrived early, did her work with impressive efficiency, but maintained a professional distance that sometimes seemed exaggerated. She only talked about matters related to the tasks, avoided any interaction that could be interpreted as too personal. He respected that space, understanding that she needed those barriers to feel safe. Over the weeks, a comfortable routine was established. The house had never been so organized. The meals were prepared with care, and the children were clearly happier having both constant presences. He realized that for the first time in years, his life had a balance that he didn't know was missing. But he also noticed something else. The girl's mother carried an old sadness in her eyes, something that went far beyond poverty or recent difficulties. One day, while organizing some documents that she had brought from her old residence, an old envelope fell from a box. A faded photo slipped to the floor. He picked it up without thinking, and what he saw left him completely paralyzed. It was the building of the company where he worked, but from many years ago, judging by the style of the architecture around it. And in that photo, the girl's mother was there, visibly younger, wearing elegant and professional clothes, smiling next to people he immediately recognized as important executives of the company. His heart raced. That woman he had known as a poor cleaner who struggled for survival every day had once worked at his company, and not in just any position. By her clothes, her posture, the environment of the photo, she had clearly held a position of relevance. What had happened? How did someone with a promising future in a large corporation end up cleaning to survive, living in a shack, without resources to adequately care for her own daughter? He quickly put the photo away when he heard footsteps approaching, but his mind was racing. He needed to discover the truth, understand that story that had clearly been erased from the official records. But how to investigate without violating her privacy, without showing that he was snooping on her life? What if what he discovered was worse than he imagined? He spent days tormented by that discovery. The photo burned in his conscience like a secret he shouldn't know. He tried to act normally, but realized that she noticed something different in his behavior. He was more thoughtful, watched her more closely, as if trying to fit pieces of a puzzle that didn't make sense. Finally, he made the decision to discreetly investigate the company's files. He looked for a co-worker who had been with the company for over a decade, someone who might remember the old events. Under the guise of checking past hiring processes, he gained access to archived records. And there was her name, registered as an executive assistant, with excellent evaluations, rapid promotions, a bright future outlined in the papers yellowed by time. But her departure was marked only as a voluntary resignation, without details, without explanations. He talked to the older co-worker over coffee, asking seemingly casual questions about employees who left suddenly years ago. The woman was thoughtful for a moment. Then her face changed, as if she remembered something unpleasant that she preferred to forget. She lowered her voice and told, with hesitation, about a complicated situation that the company had stifled years ago. A young assistant had made serious accusations against a director, alleging constant harassment and intimidation when she tried to resist. The blood ran cold in his veins as he listened. The colleague continued, explaining that there was an attempt at an internal investigation, but the director was too powerful, had friends in strategic positions. The assistant was pressured to drop the charges, faced isolation from colleagues who feared associating with her, received veiled threats about her future career. When she found out she was pregnant, the situation worsened. Instead of protection, she found judgment. Many assumed that the pregnancy proved that there had been consent, that she was making up stories to get some compensation. He felt nausea rising in his stomach. He asked what happened to the director, and the answer was like a punch to the gut. Nothing. The man continued working, was even promoted years later, and currently held an even higher position in the company's hierarchy. The colleague mentioned that she had always suspected that there were other victims over the years, but no one spoke openly about it. It was one of those corporate secrets that everyone knew, but no one dared to confront. During the following days, he delved into a deeper investigation. He spoke discreetly with people from human resources, searched old digital files, and discovered a disturbing pattern. At least 3 other women had left the company abruptly over the years, always after working directly with that same director. All with promising careers interrupted suddenly, all with departures marked as voluntary, all disappearing without a trace. Anger grew inside him like a storm. That woman who worked in his house, who he saw struggling every day with unwavering dignity, had been destroyed by the same corporate system he was a part of. All the poverty, all the suffering that she and her daughter faced, the sleepless nights, the hunger, the forced neglect, all could have been avoided if someone had had the courage to do the right thing years ago. But confronting her with this discovery seemed like a terrible violation. He had no right to force her to relive that trauma just to satisfy his need to understand. He spent sleepless nights debating with himself while she continued working in the house, maintaining that careful professional distance with no idea that he knew her past. The tension finally became unbearable. He noticed that she perceived his changes in behavior, saw the worry grow in her eyes, as if she expected to be dismissed at any moment. One day, after putting the children to sleep, he gathered all the courage he had and asked to talk to her. He saw the immediate fear spread across her face, the defensive posture she instantly assumed. With a trembling voice, he confessed that he had found the photo, that he had investigated and discovered about her past at the company. He expected anger, accusations of invasion of privacy, maybe even for her to grab her daughter and leave immediately. But the reaction was different. She froze completely, her face losing all color, her hands starting to tremble. Then she broke down, not in ordinary tears, but in a devastating catharsis of years of forced silence. The words came out in a painful torrent. She told how she had been young and ambitious, believing that hard work would be rewarded. How the director had started with praise and opportunities, then moved on to inappropriate touches, loaded comments, increasingly explicit propositions. How she had tried to set professional boundaries and saw her tasks being sabotaged, her projects being credited to others, her reputation being stained with subtle gossip. When she finally mustered the courage to report him formally, she faced a wall of disbelief. They said she was misinterpreting the situation, that the director was a married and respected man, that she must be confusing professional kindness with romantic interest. The internal investigation was a sham, quick interviews that had a conclusion decided before they even started. She was isolated. Colleagues stopped having lunch with her. Meetings happened without her being notified. The pregnancy was the final blow. She found out when she was completely alone, without support from anyone at the company. She tried to continue working, but the psychological pressure was unbearable. When she resigned, it was with her spirit completely broken, without financial resources, without professional references, because no one wanted to be associated with her. She spent the entire pregnancy working in low-paying jobs, sleeping in cheap boarding houses, without adequate medical care. It was during the poorly assisted pregnancy that the complications began. The extreme stress, the malnutrition, the lack of prenatal care affected the baby's development. When the girl was born with special needs, she carried crushing guilt, as if all her daughter's suffering was a direct result of her choices, of having reported him, of not having been strong enough to endure it all in silence. She spent years believing that she was responsible for the child's condition, punishing herself by working to exhaustion to try to compensate. He listened to everything without interrupting, holding her hand when the words became too difficult. When she finished, he made a promise. He would use his position in the company to ensure that the truth came to light, that the director was held accountable, that she received the recognition and compensation she deserved. But she begged him not to do anything, her voice desperate. She was afraid of retaliation, afraid of losing the job that finally gave her stability, afraid that her daughter would suffer the consequences of messing with powerful people. He spent days respecting her request, but his conscience wouldn't leave him alone. He began an even more careful investigation, talking to former employees, searching for documents, and discovered that the director's pattern of abuse was even worse than he had imagined. He found 3 other women who had suffered similar situations, all silenced in the same way, all with careers destroyed, lives ruined. He gathered meticulous evidence, archived emails, documented testimonies, human resources records that had been hidden but not destroyed. He compiled everything in a detailed dossier and went back to see her. This time, he didn't ask permission, but offered a choice. He showed her everything he had discovered, explained that other women were willing to speak if someone supported them, and said that the final decision was hers. He would support her regardless of what she chose, but he couldn't make that decision for her. She spent 3 days in agonizing silence, pondering. She talked at length with her 4-year-old daughter, who obviously didn't understand the complexity of the situation, but whose simple, innocent gaze seemed to ask, "What world do you want me to grow up in?" On the 3rd day, she came to him with a determination in her eyes that he had never seen before. She said that she couldn't continue in silence, knowing that other women might be suffering, that her daughter deserved to grow up in a world where injustices were not accepted just because the abuser had power. Together, they submitted a formal and comprehensive complaint. The company's initial reaction was to try to minimize it, but he used his own contacts, his reputation built over years, to ensure that a serious investigation was conducted. He risked his own position by publicly siding with her, facing colleagues who advised him not to get involved, not to sacrifice his career for something that wasn't his problem. The independent investigation took months, but eventually revealed a network of systematic abuse that spanned more than a decade. The director was fired, lost accumulated benefits, faced lawsuits that destroyed his reputation, built on lies. Other victims felt safe to testify, and the company was forced to implement real structural changes in its protection policies. She received substantial financial compensation, not only for past suffering, but for years of lost career, for the trauma she carried, for the opportunities stolen. The amount was enough to guarantee first-class medical treatment for her daughter, quality education, and financial security that she had never imagined possible. But more important than the money was the validation. Official reports recognizing that she had told the truth, that she had fought against an unjust system, that her courage years ago had been real, even when no one believed it. With adequate resources, the girl began specialized treatments that brought significant improvements. Intensive physical therapy, modern equipment, state-of-the-art medications. She gained more mobility, more independence, and for the first time in her life she smiled without pain. The transformation in the child was mirrored in the mother, who little by little let go of the guilt she had carried for so long, understanding that nothing that happened to her daughter was her fault. The relationship between him and her evolved naturally into something deeper. It wasn't immediate romance or sudden passion, but a connection built on mutual respect, trust earned in difficult moments, and recognition that they had saved each other. He had learned about genuine empathy, about using privilege to do real justice. She had recovered her dignity, her voice, her ability to trust again. The 2 children grew up as true siblings, united by bonds stronger than blood. The family that was formed, built not by accident, but by conscious choices of people who decided to fight for justice and love, became the home that everyone needed, And in that chance encounter at a bus stop in the rain, where a man decided not to turn his face away from the suffering of others, a journey had begun that transformed all the lives involved, proving that true family is built with courage, compassion, and the willingness to do what is right, even when it is difficult. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.